Welcome once again, everyone, to the Country HQ Spotlight On podcast, where we interview some of the latest, greatest artists from Australia and around the world. And today, we're going to shine the spotlight on a fantastic alt-country band that's showing signs of rising up in the industry with their fourth album just out. We're going to talk about that. But let's first introduce the man himself, Hugh Martin from the Dead Beat Daddios. Hugh, good morning and welcome to Country HQ Spotlight On.
G'day, Adam. Lovely to be here, and thanks for having me.
The Dead Beat Daddios, I mean, it's such a fantastic, unique name, and it draws visionary of, that sort of swing, hip, rockabilly sound and you fuse alt country. Where did the name come from and how did the band come together?
Well, there's a little bit of a story about this. Going back a few years now, some old friends were of mine, music friends, found ourselves in Brisbane. So we grew up in Melbourne playing in pubs and clubs in the 90s, 80s and 90s together. And then for various reasons moved to Brisbane. And we found ourselves working jobs with young families, busy as happens. But we were missing playing music. And the Brisbane music scene at that stage, whilst there was plenty going on, there were places like the Zoo and a few other band rooms in Fortitude Valley and places like that. It didn't have the same feel that Melbourne has, for example. And don't want to be parochial about it, but was probably also our stage in life. And so we decided to get together and write and record some music. So this was Jim Carton, who's still a drummer in the Dead Beat Daddios. He and I played together for many years in the T-Bones in Melbourne. He was and still is a drummer in the Warner Brothers. And Malcolm Macbeth, who was another old friend, playing bass at that point with us. And he'd previously been in the Warner Brothers with Jim. And he and I had played together when we were young as well. So we got together, we wrote some songs, we recorded them ourselves. And because we were kind of absconding on the weekend to play music, and leaving our partners with our young kids, Jim, who has a slightly roundabout sense of humour, shall we say, decided that the name the Dead Beat Daddios was a good description of what we were doing and who we were. And you're right, that Daddios element does have a bit of a harking back to the 50s and we're all into rockabilly, early rockabilly when we were younger, and that swing kind of country style was very much something that we've always loved.
In your role as frontman and as singer and so on, where were your musical influences growing up? Were you influenced by what your family was listening to, or did you find that scene yourself?
I think it was a little bit of a combination. I certainly grew up in a musical family. I've got a number of siblings who all played music. My parents played as amateur musicians, but loved music. It was always music around the house. I guess from a generational point of view, my parents were into, Frank Sinatra and some of the 60s pop stuff and classical music. My tastes were very much, formed in listening to FM radio in the early 80s. So in Melbourne particularly, it was things like XY, Eon FM, and then the community radio stations, PBS and Triple R, when they came online as well. And that whole late 70s sound of Australian country rock was something that really appealed to me. It was the mix of great musicianship but songs and structures around songs and storytelling, melody, harmonies in vocals, those kind of things have always really appealed to me. And there were some great bands, whether it was the Dingoes or Jojo Zepp and the Falcons through to Australian Crawl and Cold Chisel. Those kind of things were on the radio a lot when I was growing up and listening. And we were all musical peers were all listening to similar sorts of things. So that was definitely a big influence. And then in subsequent years, we started to discover American, what would have been called, I guess, outlaw country at the time. And personally speaking, I've always been much more interested in the Bakersfield sort of sound rather than the Nashville sound. And that Merle Haggard
Buck Owens,
exactly. Yeah. That sort of country is something that really appealed to me. I was just thinking this week, in fact, I was fortunate enough to see Chris Christopherson in Ballarat a couple of years ago when he came through Australia. And he, wonderful, wonderful show. Even in his 80s, he still put on a great show with a terrific band. And also the songs. It really is always about the songs. So I think that's kind of where the influences really come from.
For those who are unaware and so on, he was talking about, we lost Chris Christopherson this week. So when we post this, same thing. I went straight back into the or the Christopherson, the original debut album, and it's got so many fantastic songs on it, so many memories, and and I always come back to the story when I met him once years ago, and I said, "How did you first get signed?" He goes, "I was the janitor at CBS Columbia when Cash was recording, and Cash would come in on the night shift, and I would see him all the time, and we'd talk, and then I kept giving him tapes, and it's like, what a fantastic story." And then he goes, these fantastic songs, not just the songs that he's written, but also he's written, covered by other people. Willie Nelson's done an album full of these songs,
Yeah.
So many, I mean, Janis
Joplin,
just amazing legacy there and so on.
Yeah.
You mentioned there before, the community radio in Melbourne, and bands like you listen to bands like the Dingoes and Chisel and probably Goanna and things like that. And, you talk about Melbourne bands like the Dingoes, or when the Bushwhackers were rising, or Flying Emus were rising up.
Yeah.
How important has that been, not only as a listener, but now as a professional musician? How important is community radio for that fabric?
Oh, look, I don't think it can be overstated.
No.
And in fact, Melbourne proudly kind of still considers itself one of the capitals of live music in not just Australia, but around the world. And it is very large part down to the health and the support of the community radio networks. And the way that they are able to not just broadcast, but package and curate new music, always very supportive of new bands and new artists coming through, but then connect that to the live club scene, I think is something that's kind of unique and just really a great, it's a credit to the people that have kind of gotten behind it, which is the community generally, really speaking, because, there are program makers on those stations that have been there for a long time, but they are the first to acknowledge that it's the audience and the support that community and Melbourne as a city. Now, broadly speaking, I think one of the wonderful things about the digital developments now is that you can listen to these radio stations anywhere. I think, further to that, there's been a whole new kind of range of other community radio stations around the country. Geography doesn't matter so much anymore, because you're not sort of locked into a transmission signal. So I think that initial kickstart that Triple R and PBS did, and to show what could be done, has become, for music anyway, for specialist types of music and genre music, something that's really taken off now that there are digital distribution opportunities for anyone, really.
Yeah.
So it's terrific. We
always talk about, what do they call those moments where, what if this didn't happen? You wonder what if there wasn't PBR or Triple R?
Yeah.
Would certain bands have been who they are now? Would the Cruel Sea be as massive as they are? And, things
that's
like
right.
That?
I think not, in some ways, and it's not just that. There was a punk scene in Melbourne in the 80s that thrived in no small part because of the support they were able to get and the communication sort of around letting people know what was happening, thanks to community radio. So it's not just country, blues as well, jazz. It's just wonderful that all the genres of music can be traced back to, I think, the community support.
You mentioned the genres there, and I wanted to ask you here, because you're based in Melbourne, correct?
Well, I actually live in Ballarat.
Ballarat, okay. So Victoria, yep.
Yeah,
okay,
but grew up in Melbourne.
In a post-COVID world, one thing I'm finding is that the fans have become music fans. We're moving away from genre fans, from I like jazz, I like country, I like blues, and I'm seeing and talking to a lot more people who are immersing themselves or exposing themselves to all types of music. And I think a lot of it has to do with where we were stuck at home, we were locked down. Music, people who love music, and so even families, played music for the first time in a long time, regularly or for hours and hours and hours. Is that something you're seeing and feeling in that Victorian scene, that you're getting a lot more diverse crowds in the last couple of years?
Look, I think there's definitely something to that. I remain hopeful that people will continue to play instruments and learn instruments and actually play and perform music, because really that's what it's about. It's about creating and playing music that provides that connection. So yes, there were certainly a spike in instrument sales, guitar sales and so forth during COVID. That's pretty well documented. But I think that you can't sort of go past that, for better or worse, the influence of streaming services like Spotify, that really through their technology just put a whole lot of music in front of people, and that could be any genre. So I see and meet people who listen to particularly younger generation who are not sort of, I guess, their tastes aren't shaped by the same kind of genre listening that we had growing up. The other thing about that, though, I think, which is I do find a bit sad in many ways, is that the album is no longer a thing in the way it used to be. And I love albums and always have. And for me, that is an artist sort of putting together a collection of tunes that they feel has an expression about whatever it is that they're interested or focusing on. And songs in isolation tend not to have that sort of voice, I think.
It's very funny you mentioned that. You must have peeked at my notes. I wasn't looking, but I want to ask you about the album and the sequence in a moment when we start talking about your new album. But I agree. I think I'd love to Spotify, if you as an artist, you put your album onto the streaming services, you can tick a box and say, make it play in the sequence and the sequence only. Because I think albums used to have side A and side B, or the last song, and I want to talk to you about the last song on the album in a moment, but we'll come back around to that and so on. So let's talk about the band's fourth album. It's just been released, Further Away. How do you feel this album's differing from your previous releases, both, I suppose, thematically and musically?
Well, in some ways, this came about, again, as a kind of a COVID-inspired creative project. A lot of time on our hands at home, unable to get out and play. And so I was sitting around and found myself writing songs that I thought I want to record these. So I managed to find a few windows in that lockdown period to start putting down bed tracks and to work with Jim to demo the songs and then put down the bed tracks. We in terms of where that came from the previous record, the first one was a smaller, about 12 or so songs. Only about 4 or 5 of them were actually written by us at the time. Many of them had been previously written. And I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that one of my dear old friends, Paul Cumming, who I played a lot of music with during the 90s, who was a kind of a mentor in many ways musically. He passed away about 5 or 6 years ago now, but he wrote a number of songs that were never recorded. He was one of the great guitar players in the Melbourne blues and country scene. And he had a number of songs that we played many, many times during the 90s. And when I came to sit down and record the Dashboard Elvis album, which was the first Dead Beat Daddios record in about 2007 or so, 2008, there were a bunch of Paul Cummings songs that had never been recorded, and I thought I'd really like to record them. So things like If That's What It Takes, It Had to Be Done, Just Can't Get Angry With You, they are Paul Cummings songs that were on that first record. The songs that Jim and I wrote kind of shaped themselves around that sound a little bit. Then the EP, which came out in 2015, had a few more of our songs on of Paul's, and the House for Sale EP was essentially a remastering and remixing of some of those songs. So this is Further Away is the first batch of new original material that we've put together and recorded really since the early sort of 2010s or thereabouts. So it's been a while coming, but I felt also that it was a good opportunity to sort of just craft a little bit of a different sound, really go get more focused on that sort of narrative style of old country, sometimes called Americana, sort of sound. The country sound that we were playing very early on was a bit more traditional and sort of folk country, but with some blues in there as well. This is a slightly more rounded, I think, more modern country style.
The songs have a very strong storytelling element to them. They're songs about love. I think I read where you said they're songs about love, landscapes, and mistakes. That's a brilliant analogy for country music, and especially that old country scene. Is that something you focus on as a songwriter for this particular album, or is that your style?
Well, it is something that I was really thinking a lot about when I was writing, and partly because for other reasons I'd been travelling a lot around regional Australia over the last 8 or 9 years and spent a lot of time in small towns and communities just really kind of soaking up life in regional Australia. That whole way. So when I started sort of thinking about these songs, I think that in some small way that tradition of lyricism around country, what country really means, started to resonate in a way that with me that it hadn't previously, because I'd been experiencing that in a different part of my life, just in work and travel. And so I started thinking of songs like Further Away, for example, that, there are people, whether they're truck drivers or train drivers or people who travel for work who, see our country from the, parts of far north Queensland and the Territory up in the north, all the way down through the Darling-Murray Basin into the southern parts of the states, and how it changes and what it looks like. And so just thinking about when you're moving around this country, some of the things that you might take with you or that you might be looking forward to returning when you go home eventually. Those sorts of feelings were the sorts of things I was kind of trying to tap into.
And I think that's quite reflective in what you're hearing in the sound, because no two songs are the same on the album. I think you've got a great collection there. But I always like, you talked before about the sequence of albums and so on, the songs, I always think an album is, whenever I get an album or listen to an album first, especially on stream, I always make sure I listen to it, tracks 1 through 10. And I'm always fascinated by the choice and what it makes up the last track. Because Beacon, this closes this album, this Further Away, and I think it's a song. I think it needs a great spotlight. It's a great song. It's a perfect closer. It's almost like, when we talk about Willie or something, turn out the lights, the party's over. It's a song to bring you down, and but it's also a matter of a song where it makes me want to listen to the album again. Where you watch out your favorite movies, you binge those TV series like Breaking Bad, and it's like, spent 6 weeks watching that. What do I do now? I'll watch it again, and it does that in the closing song. Was that a particular track that you selected for the closer, or did it just happen by natural attrition?
No, it was. And I do remember thinking, as that came together, that it would make a nice finish to the album for exactly the reasons that you just mentioned. And thank you for saying that, because when you put these things out, you don't always know whether they're kind of hit the way or land the way you want them to. But that was exactly what I was trying to reach for with that song. It is a different feel. It's a more mellow sort of sound. The Fender Rhodes and the Hammond together with just some brushes and bass. There's no guitar in it. One voice rather than all of the harmonies that we were kind of, working on earlier in the album. And it has a different sort of slightly melancholic sort of retrospective feel in the lyrics, which is what I was trying to get read for as well.
I'm going to steal that word melancholic. I'm in the midst of writing a review for the album for Country HQ, and I'm going to steal that word melancholic. I've been looking for that all morning. You've contributed well there. So what about live? How do you think this album's going to, are these songs that you've been performing live previously, or is this a new set list you're going to have to get ready?
Look, it's actually a new set list in many ways. I've been playing these songs now for most of this year in different forms. I guess the nature of live performances in regional Victoria at the moment is that there are a set number of places you can play as a whole band. When the way this record was put together, there are it's a 5 or 6 part band with lots of keyboards and guitar parts and harmonies and so forth.
What they're doing now in Stonehaven Road, well, I wonder, as age creases my brow, if I lived in Stonehaven Road, what I'd be doing now.
But I've been playing with my sister Emily, who's the female vocalist on the record, and another friend of ours on pedal steel and guitar as a trio around regional Victoria quite a bit the last few months. And that's been really fun because it sort of strips the songs back a bit, and you've really got to think about, what's that core emotion in that song that you want to express, and how does it come through with less instrumentation around it. And it's been fun to really explore that and to feel it working in a different way, but also looking forward to playing with the rhythm section again. I can't help myself. I'm kind of an old, rock and roller at heart, really. As much as I'm, I love the country and that style, which is where my kind of, I guess, creative thinking is. There's nothing like having a drum and bass rhythm section sitting underneath a song, really moving it along. That feel is just so satisfying and fun.
What did Cash say? It's like getting on a train, and it gets faster and faster and faster and faster, and then so I've got to keep getting faster. It's got to crash.
Well, yes, although
Hopefully it doesn't crash.
that's right. And as Jim, our drummer, would say, I'm not speeding up. It's you that's speeding up.
Yes. That should be a T-shirt for every drummer in the world. I reckon I've so many people say that. Look, Hugh, it's a fantastic album. And I also wanted to comment those vocals that Emily brings, and that interplay between you two on harmony and vocals together. It's sublime, and it really suits this album. This really suits this tone. This is an album where I can sort of see, late night dinner parties and so on. Maybe a whiskey. The wine's gone by then. Let's drop the needle on it, hopefully on a vinyl copy one day, and just sit there and enjoy it and so on and share about it. And it reminds me of, I've been saying for a while, we've got book clubs. We should have record clubs where we all get together as friends or people we don't know and bring a record and talk about it. And this is an album which I think people should talk about, people should listen, people should share. Okay, so I really want to compliment you and the band on that, because it's a work of art, and I think that's what we're doing it for. But before I let you go, I want to ask you one last question. Thank you so much for your time. What's it like to be Hugh Martin when you walk out on stage?
Look, I have to admit, I'm not the natural frontman. I've spent many years playing bass guitar and guitar with other frontmen. I love music for the sake of the song and music. So I've actually had to learn to be a front person to take these songs out, and that was part of the challenge and part of the creative fun of it. But it is a bit nerve-wracking still on, to those first few moments on stage. How's the audience going to respond? Are we going to, to hit the way we want to? And then once you're warmed up and you're ready to go, you never look back.
You don't look back.
But I still feel a degree of wonder at some of the artists I see who are just such natural front people with a charisma and an ease that I'm still working on, to be honest. I wish one day.
Jim Morrison stood with his back to the crowd for the first year of the Doors. So, it happens to the best of us. But look, congratulations to you and the band on the album. It's a fantastic album. Hopefully we're going to get to see you on the road, not just in Victoria, but into Sydney and some of the other states as well, and maybe some of the festivals like Tamworth, wherever we can get to see you. Follow the Dead Beat Daddios and Hugh's band online on the social medias. And certainly, over the long weekend, give yourself a chance to listen to this album. It's a fantastic album. It's one that should be shared with friends, especially people who love music, and something that you can talk about and hear a whole different things. It's almost like going to a buffet, but one of those good buffets, not the cheap one in the club, So we're going to get a bit of everything, and I think that's what we need in music. So thank you again for sharing, Hugh. Been fantastic to catch up with you, and congratulations to you and the band on Further Away, the new album out now.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks for joining us today on the Country HQ Spotlight On podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends to keep listening to our next episode for the latest and greatest in country music from around the world.